let's talk about the most controversial part of 28 Years Later, which is the very final scene. So I do want to talk about the whole third act, but of course, everyone wants to know. It's one of those feelings in a theater where you are like, what the fuck is going on? There's a lot of what the fuck moments in 28 Years Later, which I really appreciate. But the very end just takes a total left turn. It's a different tone, it's a different mood. It still has that stylistic violence that Boyle's famous for, but it also has a little bit more playfulness, levity, and then also modernity, really, than the rest of the film, which is why it's so shocking. I mean, even the military stuff seems to not really bring in as much modern humanity, even with an iPhone, as this final scene does. And what happens is that Spike is on the side of the road roasting a fish. He gets his cute little headshot moment, and then he's running away from a very small horde of infected. And then a man appears in a jumpsuit with gold chains, gold rings, a tiny tiara. It and it's like this sweatsuit, like mob style, and we'll talk about why. And asks quite politely, I think he also has gold teeth, if he and his buddies can get involved. And it is so confident that it provides a really excellent contrast to Spike's fear. And then they obliterate the infected with like these dance moves and these flips and using these poles that they have that some of them can like come apart and turn into weapons. They're using wires to saw off the heads of the infected. They're having a field day. It's very much like it almost gave me Tarantino because of the hilarity, like the comic violence and the unexpected kill. You know, the kind of playful, tortury, like we are here having a good time killing things. Whereas, and that's what's so funny about the juxtaposition, because Spike and everyone else that we've seen in this movie interact with the infected has done so with fear and out of survival. And these people are interacting with the infected out of playfulness, and they are having a good time. So let's rewind and talk about the breadcrumbs, because the very first time we actually see this person in a jumpsuit with gold chains is in the very first scene of the film, which is a little, it seems so unrelated at the time, but it's Jimmy, and he's watching Teletubbies with a group of other children, and we can hear the infected outside. So we are led to believe that this is the outbreak, and Jimmy is a child at this time. It's not super clear how old he is, and he's able to escape the house where he witnesses people being infected, his mother being attacked by the infected, and he runs to the church where his father is. This is really interesting because we know that there is a sequel coming already, and that there's a possibility for a third. So I'm really glad and excited and enticed by the way they handled Jimmy's father. Because when he goes to the church and he's being chased by infected, his father believes that this outbreak is the rapture, and he's really excited about getting eaten by the infected, and he sees this as a confirmation of his religious moment. This leads me to believe that Jimmy's father is a charismatic religious leader. He's incredibly maybe important and integral to the community that he's in as a charismatic religious leader, and he is willing to have a cognitive experience of the outbreak that puts himself at the center of the outbreak, that makes him the star of this moment. And he's saying, yes, my children, eat me. Now, the reason that it's so interesting that he's a charismatic religious leader is because this little taste that we get of Jimmy at the end of the movie is that he is kind of a cult leader. He does these, interesting actions with his little tiny army that he has. And the way that they interact with one another in that scene, fighting together with Jimmy as the leader, Jimmy asking permission for that to happen in the first place, Jimmy having the most jewelry on, right? And a tiara, like a literal crown on his head. It leads me to believe that Jimmy in the future comes by this kind of attitude naturally, because that is exactly what his father was like when he was young. Now, there's some other fun things about Jimmy in the movie that we see throughout, and then we'll talk about why his outfit at the end is so powerful. But little Jimmy watches his dad die. He's under the floor of the church as his dad is being eaten kind of right above him. There's a scene that we see in Act 1 where there is an infected that is hanging by his feet and has Jimmy carved into his body. But the J, I think, or the Y, one of them, is hidden by his clothing. In a way that's kind of inappropriate, that leads us to believe that this may have been really significant torture. And then we also see later, and I'm almost wondering, I haven't done a rewatch yet, I'm almost wondering what Jimmy's I missed throughout the film, because it wasn't until I saw this barn that said, he comes on the wind, and it's like a graffiti on the side of a big building that I remember to be a barn. And it seems to be talking about God. It seems to be like a religious graffiti. And then Jimmy is kind of spray painted in a different size right next to it. And that is when I started to realize, and I honestly, this is actually going to sound embarrassing, I didn't make the connection that little Jimmy in the beginning was the same Jimmy at the end and could possibly be the Jimmys in between, because I didn't register his name. It wasn't until I listened to a podcast about it that I was like, oh, that's the same guy. Just goes to show. This is why I like to watch movies twice, because I miss a lot. And that Jimmy on the barn in the watching experience is when I realized, like, oh, there's this figure of Jimmy, I don't know what that means, but there's obviously some kind of subculture on the mainland that this Jimmy figure is a part of in my watching experience. So then when we actually get to meet him, and he has this crazy contrast to everything else that we've seen in the movie. He's wearing this sweatsuit and all of this jewelry, and even his hair is a caricature of Jimmy Savile, which is a British figure who was the star of a show where kids would come to him and he would fix things for them. And he famously, I don't know when the documentary came out, but he was a pedophile, or a pedophile, as they would say in Britain. He was luring children in. He was this figure like Mr. Rogers to the US watchers. And he was this symbol of like fixing things for children, being a part of children's lives, being an adult. He was a philanthropist. He, rebuilt an orphanage. Like, he had a lot of clout in the community as someone who was like for the children. And so when it did come out that he was taking advantage of his position in that way, it was really heartbreaking for a lot of people, especially the generation that grew up with that. So to see him look like Jimmy Savile is actually really interesting. Because we don't know, and the directors in an interview that I listened to have said, like, it doesn't really have anything to do with the future of Jimmy, because in the 28 universe, that may not have come to light. You know what I mean? So really what they're talking about, which a lot of the film is talking about, which we discuss, is British culture as a whole, the proclivity of the British people that are more conservative to look into the past with rose-colored glasses and see it as a better time than it is now. That's what's so interesting to me, and the directors didn't say this, but what I really feel knowing that now And seeing this Jimmy Savile figure and knowing that it's in this kind of grander British context, which I'm a US citizen, but we're kind of in this Make America Great era, and the British, like UK area, just had this massive Brexit situation, and they are on a similar path to fascism as the United States is, which makes sense because we're a colony and we're also colonizers. So to see this figure who literally illustrates in pop culture, not even in the movie, but in pop culture, this idea of a simpler Britain, a more proper Britain, a more like the vision of UK that is innocent and that has these older men helping these children. He's a symbol of that literally fell from grace because of his taking advantage of children and being a horrible, horrible monster who was once a figure of this like daisies, rainbows, unicorn shit glitter idea of what people were then. That is really impactful. And there are some other things in the movie that do this, where they talk about the history, as we talked about on Act 1 and Act 2. But the modernity of that, if you've known who Jimmy Savile is and you've seen the documentary and you understand that not only is he a monster, he is a monster that was once an image of what is good and pure about the, about society, particularly British society. I just love that. I think it's really funny. It's really dark. It's like a dark humor move to make that joke. And which is really indicative of the whole series. Like the 28 universe has this like, fuck, that is twisted. And we're going to talk about it in the beginning of Act 3, which is what I consider to be Act 3, which is something that the franchise really does, which is put you in a position where you are witnessing the psychological decay of people as they endure the apocalypse, as they witness rage, as they fear rage will overtake them. The coping mechanisms that human beings, you can really see this in the first one with the military and the guy being kind of kept as a pet, like even at the beginning of the outbreak, like this is such a through line in the series. We see people make really twisted, fucked up decisions with the knowledge that they have at the time to cope with a totally unprecedented reality. And it really brings you into that world. It really helps you understand this. It's not just a zombie apocalypse. It is the end of humankind as we know it. And it leaves room for a new humankind to be born. And it allows us to witness the birth of that humankind through these twisted acts of violence that the human beings that enact them, that aren't yet infected, these twisted actions humanize the people that are experiencing this totally unprecedented, totally violent, totally traumatizing reality in a way that we could totally see ourselves going through, because we have the capacity for religion. We have the need as human beings, as part of the human condition, to try to control our reality and contain chaos. And when all of those things break through, what do you have left but a semblance of control that seems right for you at the time, like locking up an infected, or like dressing up like Jimmy Savile, which in this case, this person who's going as Jimmy, who is Jimmy, who's dressing this way, who is acting like Jimmy Savile, as far as we know so far, in this caricature of himself, knows Jimmy Savile as the guy who fixed it. He knows this character as a childhood figure who made everything okay. And maybe he wants to capture that. We as the audience know Jimmy Savile in a much different way, right? So we are having a projection of our suspicions from the future, but it really helps us understand where these people are coming from. That a small child who witnessed the death of his father, who is trying to survive in a world on the mainland of the infected, and he's charismatic and he's cult leadery and he's playful and he's brave, right? Because we see him in the first scene get up and walk away from the TV to open the door and see what's going on. So he's very brave, right? We see this person clinging on to this egoic symbol of I can fix it. It's just, I love it. I know that there are going to be a lot of people that it really ruins the movie for them. I'm going to talk about what actually was kind of a low point in the movie for me, because I consider Act 3 to be pretty much everything after the death of the mother. And that kind of transition from Act 2 to Act 3 is the ceremonial death of the mother. And the reason it took me out of it a little bit, and I've come to like it more now that I've been percolating on it, is that it just seemed so drastic. It was really silent. There wasn't a lot of actual critical thinking that seemed to go into that decision. And so as it was happening, what I was actually imagining was, the people on the island, namely Spike's father, hearing about this and saying that it validates this idea that the doctor is insane. Because I do think, and I still think a little bit, but I especially thought when I watched it, that the killing of Isla and the ceremonial burning and the drugging of Spike and the handing of the head, I still think that that's insane. I don't think that that's like warm and lovey-dovey and beautiful in the way that they framed it in the movie. And as I was watching it, I was really wishing that they would frame it as barbaric as it was to my eyes. As I have percolated on it more, I have come to find that I actually really see the twisted nature of that ceremony as the kind of thing that I was talking about with how humans cope with something that is just so unprecedented. And of course, you know, if I was in such late stages of metastasized cancer and it was affecting my brain in a way that I couldn't really follow the linear time, yes, maybe I would want to get out of that, in especially a way like I'm with a doctor, you know, and I know that it's not going to be super traumatic for the people that love me, like I'm leaving my son with someone. But essentially what she is doing is she is, without her husband's knowledge, taking her own life. She's admitting that she suspected that she had brain cancer and that she should have told him, which means that she allowed this journey to the doctor without anyone else take place in the first place, which in her moments of lucidity, yes, she seems to understand is wrong. But in her moments of lucidity, she also just continues to let it happen. And in addition to all of that, she's leaving Spike with someone that she, you know, kind of hardly knows to possibly get back on his own. Now, that's a bad move. I'm going to say it. Controversial. So in some way, you know, like for some people, what's going to kind of take them out of the narrative is going to be the jumpsuit moment at the very, very end. For me, what was kind of taking me out of it was the ceremony of the essentially euthanasia of the mother and the things that she says in lucidity that kind of turned me a little against her. Just a little bit. And I love that actress. She is in one of my favorite series of all time, which is Killing Eve. She's so beautiful. Her performance in this film is incredible. Absolutely insane. I loved seeing her like that. I love seeing her age. I really enjoyed seeing her older, because it does give me hope that she has a long career as she ages. I mean, she's so fucking talented. So I really love her. And it was, I think, also just hard for me to watch her go. But the whole scene itself was just clunky. And then it goes into this, immediate getting run down by Samson, and then Spike saving the doctor. And I do think Act 3 as a whole is really rushed. It's my least favorite act. I think they could have skipped the Samson thing at the very, very end before he goes back. They may have been trying to give purpose to him leaving the doctor, because otherwise he might stay. But in all of that, I think that there's also a universe in which that moment doesn't have to happen. We don't feel so rushed through Act 3. We give it a little more time of reflection and explanation, something like that. But, as I reflect on that ceremonial moment, and I recognize it for what it is, which is a barbaric coping mechanism for a situation that has, seemingly no other options. The way that the doctor is kind of walking on the line between compassion and humanity and outright insanity is something that I think is really powerful. It's just something that when I was witnessing it, I was having a hard time with the pacing of it. But, the set piece of climbing to the top of the temple and placing a skull there and facing her towards the sunrise. I mean, that set piece is gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. I think honestly what I would have preferred, even though this is really fucked up, is I would have preferred her to have died in a different way, and then the doctor to have let Spike know that she had metastasized cancer. And then we never have to know that she maybe knew in her moments of lucidity that she might have brain cancer, which to an outside audience is kind of obvious that there's maybe a brain tumor. But for Spike, he doesn't necessarily need to know that. Medicine is kind of gone at this point. And I would have preferred that to be that kind of skull moment, is he is bringing a corpse to her. To the doctor, bringing her corpse to him. But I'm being nitpicky. It is a powerful scene. It does illustrate, it does give, honestly, it gives Isla some agency. So I do respect that. But that's kind of what I would have preferred. And then, now we're kind of jumping around on this act. But after he leaves the doctor, we see that he has decided to go on his own little journey. We do talk about in Act 1 how this is a 12-year-old boy. He's coming into adolescence. It is a coming of age story. And this choice that he makes, this kind of into the wild choice to drop the baby off at the island, leave a long letter, and then just go on his way. He's even close enough, which is so funny. It kind of reminds me of when you're a little kid and you're like, I'm going to run away from home. And you pack up your stuff and you walk down the street because he can hear his father screaming. He's close enough to hear it. Or that's what I was perceiving. He could have been just thinking of that, but it seemed as if he was close enough to hear his father screaming. So he hasn't really gotten far. And he has decided to reclaim his relationship to the world by leaving what he now understands to be a really insular community of people working in a much different way. What he sees when he is in the wild and he is among the infected is that there is a different way of living. The doctor has shown him that. Now, the kind of, in addition to the doctor, he also meets Eric, which I think expands his mind quite a lot, to meet this kind of young man, which we talk about in Act 2, but the grander narrative of him deciding to take on the wild. First of all, it's stupid. He's a preteen. That's so dumb. But it also kind of, it talks about the masculinity and the transition from young to adult, teenager to man, that they're kind of doing in this society where there's rigid gender roles. It talks about that transition as something that he wants to have more control over. He really loses trust for his father, as we spoke about. He really loses trust in the community on the island. And so he wants to, and he says, I'll come back when I'm ready. He wants to kind of find his way. And I respect that a lot. I also, it's another one of those things where it's this absolutely wackadoo, makes no sense decision that only makes sense for this person because this is such a nonsensical world that we are in now. And to have that journey interrupted by this little tease to the sequel, we get to find out who this Jimmy person is, who created such a crazy ass moment in Act 1 with the hanging body that is foreshadowing when he says maybe it's a warning. This little tease for the sequel interrupts this idea that this little boy is going to go on this quest and become like a part of the wild. Like, it really looks like that's kind of what's about to happen, is he's going to go like Jumanji. And instead we see, oh, actually he's going to stumble into a subculture on the mainland. Or I'm sorry, I've been saying island instead of mainland, on the mainland, and possibly become one of them, or have the choice to, or come to understand the world in a different way. I love this movie. Even though Act 3 is the weakest in my opinion, it is still such a good film with a really incredible ending in my opinion. As far as endings go, I think actually kind of taking that left turn is what is going to get people excited about the sequel. And I think it's something that people are going to be talking about right now for film. I think word of mouth for horror is really valuable. So having an ending that we can talk about is, it's hot. It's what's happening. You know, the promise of a trilogy can actually be, you know, exhausting, overwhelming, and then giving us that cute little playful ending that totally reminded me of World War Z, which is my favorite zombie franchise. Giving us that to look forward to is telling us, hey, this was really heavy, and if you come back for the next serving, we're gonna have a lot of fun. And I think that that's a good move. That's a move in the right direction. Thanks for watching.